Fox host Howard Kurtz thinks the media is taking it too easy on Bernie Sanders. Now, in this clip, Howard Kurtz is going to explain why he thinks this.
Okay, here's why I think he's not really being treated as a serious candidate, because he's not getting the scrutiny that comes along with being a top-tier candidate. So, for example, even on his positions of breaking up the banks or single-payer health care, we should have a debate about that. But I shouldn't say nobody, very few go into that. But also, New York Times reporting that some of his writing 4 decades ago, including this whopper, cervical cancer can be caused by a lack of orgasms. And then Politico reporting this week that Sanders, again, decades ago, fathered an out-of-wedlock child. Can you imagine the media reaction if that had been reported about any other candidate?
Could you imagine the outrage, the scandal? Well, you know what, Howie? Here's a clue. Nobody cares. No one who actually looks at the issues of Bernie Sanders' campaign, what he's running on, actually gives 2 shits about a couple of quote-unquote scandalous essays. As a voter, I don't give a shit about any of that, and a lot of Americans don't either. And then the corporate media, of course, scratches his head. Well, like, I don't get it. Why aren't people talking about this? Why aren't people talking about the incredibly unimportant issue while the middle class is being fucking crushed? Well, maybe it's because they're too busy being fucking crushed by the 1%, and Bernie is only one of the few people talking about it. O'Malley, to be fair, Martin O'Malley's also talking about it. There's some other candidates that are starting to talk about income inequality, but no one at the depth of Bernie Sanders, and of course no one else has been talking about income inequality for as long as Bernie Sanders. Remember, if you go back to the 1970s, Sanders was also talking about, guess what, income inequality. Contrast that to some of the candidates of today who are not talking about it, who are just recently have adopted the idea of talking about income inequality. Now, when it comes to what are they going to do about it, we don't really know. At least when it comes to Clinton. She hasn't exactly come out with a plan to attack income inequality. Anyway, Bernie's popularity is simply because he talks about the issues, and he's not trying to make this campaign about him. And the media is all fucking confused about that whole thing. Like, why aren't we talking about Bernie Sanders, the character, the person? That's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about his scandalous essays. Ooh, he thought orgasms could stop cervical cancer. Oh, what an idiot! You know what? That's okay. So if he wrote that back in the 1970s, there wasn't a lot of medical research on the female anatomy, and to be honest, there still isn't now. We still don't understand fully about female anatomy. Now, we certainly know that, at least empirically, when it comes to science, no, orgasms do not prevent cervical cancer. But Bernie Sanders is kind of on the right side anyway. He's on the side of pro-orgasm. Not a bad side to be on, at least in my opinion. And besides, are you really going to argue that the media has been too soft on Bernie Sanders? Everywhere you go, almost everything you see in print and on some of these news media sites is about how Bernie Sanders has no chance of winning and that he's a socialist. He's a socialist. For example, I'm going to show you a clip a couple of weeks ago where Claire McCaskill says essentially the same thing.
I think the media is giving Bernie a pass right now. I very rarely read in any coverage of Bernie that he's a socialist. I think everybody wants a fight, and I think they are not really giving the same scrutiny to Bernie Sanders that they're giving to certainly Hillary Clinton and the other candidate. I think Bernie is too liberal to gather enough votes in this country to become president. Rand Paul's father got massive crowds, Ron Paul. He got the same size crowds. Pat Buchanan got massive crowds. It's not unusual for someone who has an extreme message to have a following, and massive is relative.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Howard Kurtz pretty much said just the same thing. Now, as far as media scrutiny, yeah, absolutely. You remember Mother Jones posted the essay on gender norms in its entirety, by the way. And when you actually look at it in context, you realize it is about gender norms. But people just fixated on, oh, it's about rape and masturbation. Oh my God, what a pervert. right? No, this is an essay on gender norms written back in the 1970s. Seriously. Now, speaking of media backlash, Susan Ferricchio, who is a correspondent for the Washington Examiner, is also going to ask why the media is hammering Donald Trump, but not Bernie Sanders. Check this out.
Why are we giving Trump more coverage than Bernie Sanders, really? I mean, is either one more likely to get the nomination in their party? But yet Trump is getting a lot more scrutiny than Bernie Sanders. Why is that?
Is Trump getting a lot more scrutiny?
I think
he's starting to, because now we have a situation where journalists are doing what they might have done at the beginning and say, well, you know, he used to say he was pro-choice, he used to give a lot of money to Democrats, and in other words, the way he has, quote, evolved.
Look at the backlash against Trump that we're seeing in his own business, in his personal life. Right. But you're not seeing that kind of backlash. Look at some of the things Bernie Sanders is. There's no backlash against him.
There's no backlash and barely any coverage on it.
Has she not heard Donald Trump speak? Seriously. He did just call all immigrants rapists and murderers. Why is Donald Trump getting so much backlash, and Bernie Sanders, how come nobody's ever talking about him? How come nobody ever gives Bernie Sanders any backlash? Maybe because he's not going out and calling immigrants racist, rapists and murderers. And when Sanders decides to call all wealthy people rapists, then I'm sure he'll get some pushback. Even from regular people, even from supporters. Like, hey, wait a minute. You know, like, you should tone it down, man. Like, that's not right. But he's not doing that. And the reason why is that, look, the media wants to write up Bernie Sanders because of what he's saying. What he's saying resonates with regular working people, with the American people. He talks about the issues, and of course the mainstream media, the thing about the mainstream media is that they don't want to talk about the issues. They'd rather engage in character assassination. They'd rather engage in frivolous, unimportant topics like, ooh, scandalous essay, because they want to avoid the issues.